Hello there, grammar world. Today we're talking about verb complements. This is another video of the two-part series of complements, subject and verb. Today we're, of course, talking about verb complements, and verb complements are words that complete the meaning of, in this case, action verbs. Action verb. Subject complements complete the meaning of linking verbs. So, action verbs. Now, there are two types or two flavors of action verb. One is the direct object. And a direct object is going to be a noun or a pronoun that receives the action of the verb. So the action, this is an action verb. The subject is committing this action, and the action goes somewhere. Now, of course, we're talking about transitive action verbs, so if you want to know more about transitive action verbs, then you need to watch that video. But for purposes of this discussion, let's just assume they're action verbs. Now, a direct object is when an action verb has an object, when that action is going somewhere. Now, the direct object answers who or what receives the action. The indirect object answers the question to whom, or for whom the action was done. The indirect object is always going to be in between the verb and the direct object. So in between there is the indirect object. If there is nothing in between the verb and the direct object, there will not be an indirect object. This is very important. So let's look at some examples. I threw the ball. So threw is the action verb. And I threw what? Remember, because the direct object answers the question of what. What receives the action? I threw the ball. The ball is the direct object. There is no noun between the verb and the direct object, so there is no indirect object. Let's look at the next one. I threw the catcher the ball. So threw, again, is the action verb. And what did I throw? Did I throw the catcher or did I throw the ball? I threw the ball. Now, that makes that the direct object. It receives the action of throwing. And then we have this noun in between the verb and the direct object. And I can answer the question, to whom or for whom was this action done? It was done to the catcher. So the catcher is the indirect object. Let's look at another way of thinking about this. I threw the ball to the catcher. So again, we have action. And what did I throw? I threw the ball. The ball is the direct object. Now, this is essentially answering the same as this, but this right here is a prepositional phrase. No phrase. And a prepositional phrase cannot be a complement. You're just going to have to trust me on that. It cannot be the complement. It cannot be the object that you threw. I threw what? The catcher. No, I did not throw that thing. And if I asked to whom did I throw it, I did not throw it to the catcher, right? You have to include the whole phrase there. So this phrase can't be the object. And in fact, when looking at these parts of speech, you can generally cross out the prepositional phrases, and it reduces dramatically the number of words in the sentence. It helps it out completely when you're trying to figure out any particular part of speech. So let's read this next sentence. With the wind in my eye, I read the catcher's signal. So again, let's take out the prepositional phrases right from the beginning. So with the wind in my eye, I read the catcher's signal. That's all you have left. Read is the action verb. I read what? I read the signal. Now, you might think, oh, we have a noun in between the direct object and the verb. But this, because it's modifying signal, right? It's possessing whose signal. Therefore, this is now an adjective. It's acting like an adjective because it is modifying this noun, and that is what adjectives do. If you have something modifying a noun, it therefore makes it an adjective. So this is not an indirect object. Let me give you how it would look if it was an indirect object. I read the catcher the signal. So I still have I read, and what did I read? I read the signal. So that makes it the direct object. And then you have to ask, to whom did I read it? I read it to the catcher. See, I read the catcher the signal. So that makes it the indirect object. In this case, I read the catcher's signal. I did not read the signal to the catcher. And that's a very important distinction. Indirect object has to answer that to whom or for whom. And in this case, it doesn't, and in this case, it certainly does. So, when you are confronted with a sentence and you have to decide what type of complement you're dealing with, there's a certain order of thinking, a decision tree, and I'm going to break it down for you. So we have complements. So you're looking for the complements. That's the part of speech you're looking for. The first thing you have to figure out is, are you dealing with an action verb or are you dealing with a linking verb? If you're dealing with an action verb, then you know, well, let's get this first. Then you know that you're going to be that it's going to be a verb complement. If it's a linking verb, it's going to be a subject complement, and there is an entirely another video on subject complements. So, if you have a verb complement, that is going to be a direct object. If you have a direct object, then you might have an indirect object. There is no guarantee, though. So I'm going to leave these here. I'm going to go ahead and put them in here. If you're looking for subject complement, it might be an adjective or it might be a noun. If it's a noun, it's a predicate nominative. If it's an adjective, it's a predicate adjective. So this is our decision tree. So complements, you figure out it's an action verb, and then you know it's a verb complement. And once you know it's a verb complement, you're looking for that direct object. If there is an object that's answering the question to whom or for whom is getting that action, then you have as well as an indirect object. So direct object, indirect object. So let's do a recap. We're dealing with complements here. Specifically, we're dealing with verb complements because these are the objects that are going to complete the meaning of the verb. They are going to be receiving the action of that action verb, and it is an action verb. If it's an object receiving the action verb, where you can ask to who or what receives the action, that's a direct object. If there is a noun in between the verb and the direct object, and it answers the question, to whom or for whom is this action done, then you have an indirect object. And that's pretty much it. The moment you figure out that you have an action verb, and that action verb has an object, then you can pretty much find the direct object. And if you find the direct object, then you can find the indirect object. You cannot have an indirect object without a direct object. If the indirect object is after the direct object, you will see it becomes a phrase. And a phrase cannot be the object, it cannot be the complement of the verb. So, thank you very much.